Wonka rushed on down the corridor. The nut room, it said on the next door they came to. "All right," said Mr. Wonka. "Stop here for a moment and catch your breath, and take a peek through the glass panel of this door. But don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go into the nut room. If you go in, you disturb the squirrels." Everyone crowded around the door. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools around a large table. On the table there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working away like mad, shilling the walnuts and the tremendous speed. "These squirrels are specially trained for getting the nuts out of walnuts," Mr. Wonka explained. "Why use squirrels?" Mike TV asked. "Why not use Oompa Loompas?" "Because," said Mr. Wonka, "Oompa Loompas can get walnuts out of walnut shells in one piece. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of walnut shells every time. Therefore, I have to have squirrels to do the job." And see how they first tap each walnut with their knuckles to be sure it's not a bad one. If it's bad, it makes a hollow sound, and they don't bother to open it. They just throw it down the rubbish chute. They watched the little squirrel as he tapped the walnut shell with his knuckles. He cocked his head to one side, listening intently. Then suddenly he threw the nut over his shoulder into a large hole in the floor.
"Hey, Mommy!" shouted Veroka suddenly. "I've decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels." "Don't be silly, sweetheart," said Mrs. Salt. "These all belong to Mr. Wonka." "I don't care about that," shouted Veruca. "I want one. All I've got at home is 2 dogs and 4 cats, 6 bunnies, rabbits and 2 parakeets, and the 3 canaries, and the green parrot, and turtle, and bowl of goldfish, and a cage of white mice, and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel." "All right, my pet," Mrs. Salt sighed soothingly. "Mommy will get you a squirrel just as soon as possibly can." "But I don't want any old squirrel," Veruca shouted. "I want a trained squirrel." "They're not for sale," Mr. Wonka answered. "She can have one." "Who says I can?" shouted Veruca. "I'm going in to get myself on this very minute." "Don't," said Mr. Wonka quickly. But he was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with small, black, beady eyes. Veruca Salt stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. "All right," Veruca said, "I'll have you." She reached out her hands to grab the squirrel. But as she did so, every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap toward her and landed on her.
25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned it down. 25 more caught hold of her left arm and pinned it down. 25 caught hold of her right leg and anchored it to the ground. 24 caught hold of her left leg, and the one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of them all, climbed up onto her shoulder and started tap-tap-tapping the wretched girl's head with his knuckles. "Save her!" screamed Mrs. Salt. "Veruca, come back! What are they doing to her?" "They are testing her to see if she is a bad nut," said Mr. Wonka. "You watch." Veruca struggled furiously. The squirrel on her shoulder went tap-tap-tapping the side of her head with his knuckles. Then, all at once, the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. "My goodness, she's a bad nut after all," said Mr. Wonka. "Her head must have sounded quite hollow." "Where are they taking her?" shrieked Mrs. Salt. "She's going where all the other bad nuts go," said Mr. Willy Wonka. "Down the rubbish chute." "Then save her!" cried Mrs. Salt. "Too late," said Mr. Wonka. "She's gone." "But where?" shrieked Mrs. Salt, flapping her arms. "What happens to the bad nuts? Where does the chute go to?" "That particular chute," Mr. Wonka told her, "runs directly into the great big main rubbish pipe, which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory."
"Don't worry," said Mr. Wonka. "There is always a chance that they've decided not to light it today." "A chance?" yelled Mr. Salt. "My darling Veruca, she'll be sizzled like a sausage." "Quite right, my dear," said Mr. Salt. "Now see here, Wonka," he added. "I think you've gone just a shade too far this time. I do indeed. My daughter may be a bit of a frump. I don't mind admitting it. But that doesn't mean you can roast her to a crisp. I'll have you know I'm extremely cross about this. I really am." "Oh, don't be cross, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka. "I expect she'll turn up again sooner or later. She may not even have gone down at all. She may be stuck in the chute just below the entrance hole, and if that's the case, all you have to do is go in and pull her up again." Hearing this, both Mr. and Mrs. Salt dashed into the nut room and ran over to the hole in the floor and peered in. "Veruca!" shouted Mrs. Salt. "Are you down there?" There is no answer. Mrs. Salt bent further forward to get a closer look. It was a dangerous position to be in. She needed only one tiny little push, one gentle nudge in the right place. And that's exactly what the squirrels gave her. Although she toppled into the hole head first, screeching like a parrot.
"Good gracious me," said Mr. Salt, as he watched his fat wife go tumbling down the hole. He saw her disappearing into the darkness. "What's it like down there, Angina?" he called out. He leaned further forward. The squirrels rushed up behind him. "Help!" he shouted. But he was already toppling forward, and down the chute he went, just as his wife had done before him and his daughter. "Oh dear!" cried Charlie, who was watching with the others through the door. "What on earth's going to happen to them now? I expect someone will catch them at the bottom of the chute," said Mr. Wonka. "But what about the great fiery incinerator?" asked Charlie. "They only light it every other days," said Mr. Wonka. "Perhaps this is one of the days when they let it go out. You never know, they might be lucky."